Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Sarah Gergel, and I work with the Living Archives Project, where we are collecting stories from various communities on the impact of COVID-19 on their lives over the last few years.
Okay.
Today is May 23rd, 2023, and this week there were 20 reported cases of COVID-19 in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County area, which actually shows an 18% decrease over the last 2 weeks. Therefore, each subject is comfortable not wearing a mask. Caroleen, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me. I am Caroleen Burroughs, and today is a gorgeous day in Charlotte, North Carolina. And just to give a quick description of myself, so I am Asian, so I am Vietnamese. Both of my parents are, immigrants from Vietnam. They are refugees from the Vietnam War. I am 5'4". I am, today I'm wearing a hot pink wig because I am also fundraising for a nonprofit in Charlotte called Carolina Breast Friends, and in that volunteering, I have committed to wearing this hot pink wig for the entire month to both raise awareness of the nonprofit and the support that they do for people impacted with breast cancer, and also to fundraise. So it's kind of silly, but it's fun. I'm wearing this hot pink wig. I have on my Library Foundation shirt today because I'm also on the board of directors for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library Foundation, and I am one of those very rare Charlotte natives. So,
That's
yes.
amazing. So you are a Charlotte native.
I am.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about your experience being a Charlotte native, and what is something that you've noticed change throughout the years?
So Charlotte has experienced unbelievable growth, right? I'm in my 40s, and when I was growing up, Charlotte it is a big city, but the growth that it experienced is incredible. And then talking about from a COVID perspective, there were just a huge influx of people moving in. Mm-hmm. At least that's what I felt like during COVID, because with the advance of remote working, people could come here and live and have a very good standard of living, a very good cost of living, and still have a lot of good access to employment. So I've just seen a lot of growth. I grew up on the east side of town, close to a mall called Eastland Mall, and that was in the 70s and 80s, and Eastland Mall was the jam. And people loved Eastland Mall, and I remember when I was small, every time my parents had family in town or friends in town, we would always take them to Eastland Mall and show off that the mall had a big ice skating rink in the bottom of it. So that was very exciting. Now, fast forward, and the mall is gone. So that mall actually was demolished. I don't remember when, but it is gone now. So it's interesting to see all the growth that the city has experienced. Unfortunately, things like Eastland Mall didn't survive. So it's also interesting because both of my parents worked at IBM, and back then there was no road that took you to IBM directly, and so they would have to take all the back roads to get out to what we would now call the university area. And now there's a big corridor, W.T. Harris, that goes out there. And so there's just been a lot of tremendous growth, and just remembering, I'm talking about when before W.T. Harris was the road even existed. Then when I was in grade school, my bus stop was on W.T. Harris, and it was 2 lanes, 1 lane going each direction. And now I think that little section of road is maybe 8 to 10 lanes wide. So that's just a small example of the tremendous growth this city has seen.
It's a really amazing example. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me a little bit about yourself. We did an activity together called the hand map. So there, I did ask some personal questions on there. Is there anything about yourself that you would like to share with us?
So like I mentioned earlier, I am a Charlotte native. I actually went to college here. So I went to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So that's something that's funny. I was in actually a library meeting last night, and our new library CEO is from another area, and he was introducing somebody that was from the University of North Carolina, and then he said, at Chapel Hill, he said, now I've learned it's really big deal. It's a really big deal to make the distinction because there's so many UNC schools. But I did go to school here at UNC Charlotte. I studied mechanical engineering, and one of the things that I wrote about on my hand map is that, I actually just took early retirement from corporate America, and now my full-time job is career coaching. So I think one of the big changes that I've experienced in my own adult life is, when I went to college, I studied mechanical engineering. It was a great program. I was a mechanical engineer, am a mechanical engineer, and I was in the manufacturing industry around 15 years. And then I transitioned to banking because that is a big part of who Charlotte, like the city of Charlotte, is the headquarters to several large financial services industries. And when I was looking at doing a career transition, I researched what are the big industries in Charlotte to find work, and I discovered they were, government, healthcare, and banking. And so I chose banking, and so I transitioned from engineering to banking. And I was an analyst. I worked at both Bank of America and Wells Fargo. And then I was recruited to Microsoft. And I was at Microsoft, for several years. And that's where I just took my early retirement from.
Wow,
So,
that's amazing.
yes. And through all of that, I became very good at transitioning jobs, which is why, so this is another interesting thing during COVID, was I actually started a business with my ex-husband, and we filed our articles of organization in February of 2020.
Okay.
And so our paperwork came back the last day of February of 2020, and our business, like I said, I was doing career coaching, or I am doing career coaching, and he was doing in-person training. And then in March, COVID hit. So we started this business, literally got the paperwork the last day of February, had all this training scheduled for March, the next month, and then as COVID swept through, all of our training obligations or jobs, they just all disappeared overnight.
Wow.
So that was a very interesting journey there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little more about that journey?
Yeah. So originally when we started that business, the idea was we were going to do in-person training. We were talking about agile methodology, a way to deliver software. He and I we're both in the IT field and technology, information technology field. And so our goal was to go and do in-person training. We had this business plan. We researched a lot of stuff. We were looking at event space, and we had actually rented some spaces, and we had scheduled some training opportunities, and all of that was scheduled starting in March because our business officially launched in February, or at the very end of February. And as we have all this stuff scheduled, and literally overnight it all disappeared. I mean, it was, people were emailing hey, we're going to have to cancel. They're closing the doors. This event space is no longer available, and people were all grounded. People were all I guess on quarantine or lockdown. We weren't really using those terms back then. It's just our business was to go out, rent space, and have individuals come and learn with us. But because of COVID, those individuals couldn't come to us, and then also because of COVID, we could no longer rent that space. So yes, that was a very interesting time. So what happened then was we had to quickly adapt to what was going on, and where we had originally planned to do everything in person, we switched and did everything on a digital platform. That was always our long-term goal.
Yeah.
But with COVID, we switched it around, turned it upside down, and we started recording videos online at home and building digital courses online. And that's also kind of the genesis of my career coaching in that perspective. I'd been doing coaching in person, but now I recognize that there were some things that I always talked about with the coaching. So I built a couple of digital courses around that. One was around updating your resume, and then another one was around the mindset when you're going through a job search. So I built 2 digital courses and launched that aspect of the business. And then over the next couple of years during COVID, with all the school and the training and everything going online, Central Piedmont Community College, so CPCC, the local community college here, they contacted us about teaching courses for them. So we actually started partnering with CPCC and my ex-husband taught several courses through them. And then I actually started teaching some courses around LinkedIn. So at the time I was working for Microsoft, which is the company that owns LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a big part of the job search. And so it just went hand in hand with the career coaching business that I had. But all of that was made possible because we had pivoted over to a digital platform. We were, very comfortable teaching over video and virtually, whereas the initial business plan was everything was going to be in person.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, I can imagine that accelerated process.
Right. Yeah.
And so, did you find that switching to a more digital platform was a little overwhelming at the time?
Yeah, we had to ramp up. So I actually built our website. I built our learning management system. I built all the technology and the tools behind, integrating all the tools that we needed. Everybody kind of overnight became a virtual platform expert. Since I was working for Microsoft, we were using their platform. I was using their platform in my day job, which is Microsoft Teams. In our small business, I was using Zoom as the platform for video technology. But what else was interesting is as I was ramping up on setting up the digital courses and building everything, the audience was equally ramping up, right? So now everybody was using Zoom, like children were using Zoom, senior citizens were using Zoom, like people were using Zoom to have virtual happy hours, and all of a sudden, and not just Zoom, but there's Zoom and there's WebEx and of course Microsoft Teams, but everybody was using all these like virtual video conferencing platforms where before that was a little bit like, okay, yeah, you might use it for work, but now it was like being used like in every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so, did you start your coaching business right then as well, or did that come a little bit after?
So I had been doing the career coaching like before that, but that was just like the official, the official setup of the business of the LLC.
Yeah.
And again, because everything went virtual, all of my coaching up to that point had always been in person with people in Charlotte. And so, of course, I started leveraging social media as a way to market. And I actually had clients in other countries. I had clients in other parts of the U.S. These are clients that I would have never been able to access before when my coaching was strictly in person and local. So that gave me a lot of perspective about supporting other people and in different places and different geographies.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so how is that going now? After these last few years of COVID, have you changed to more of a hybrid, like where you do some in person and some virtual, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So the hybrid is a great word, right? So initially during the height of COVID, everything was 100% virtual, and most of my clientele was still based in Charlotte because it was word of mouth. But like I said, I did have some that were out of the area, and then they would refer other people. But now I do, like the majority of my clients are based in this area. So normally We will start off on a virtual basis, and then we'll start to sprinkle in a little bit in person. And it kind of depends on what works best for the client. So that's a nice thing is with hybrid, you do have the option, but sometimes my clients have a tight schedule, and it's like we might need to, most of my career coaching clients are currently employed. So sometimes we might have to meet early in the morning, or maybe just like a quick check-in during the weekend, and it's easier for them to just hop on their phone or hop on the computer for half an hour, versus driving somewhere and meeting me.
Yeah.
But it also makes our in-person meetings more meaningful, because then when we do something in person, we do schedule something longer, and we usually make it a little bit social as well. So, yeah.
I love that. How do you personally see the impact that COVID-19 had on your small businesses?
Yes. So, like I mentioned, we had to pivot very quickly. The original business plan was to do everything in person. So we had to ramp up on the digital aspect, which was, good and bad. Good because I learned a lot of new technology. Bad because I had to do it super fast, and it absolutely was overwhelming trying to ramp all of that up as fast as possible. How did it impact the business? I mean, it made us completely rethink the model. Right? And we were going to be, we were looking at event space, so we'd be limited to what spaces we could rent. We were limited to the number of students that we could host, and all of a sudden, all of that went away. So we no longer had the cost of renting space. We also didn't have the physical limitations of renting space. So we could have as many people as we wanted, and then we could access and support people from, like I said, I had clients in other countries, and I could support a lot more people. So it increased my my outreach.
Yeah, I love that. So now we're going to pivot a little bit towards, you mentioned to me that you are a mother, and so how many kids do you have?
Yeah, I have one daughter, and she's 18 years old. And so when COVID started, she was 15 years old, and it was very, very challenging. 15 is just a challenging age. A teenage girl is challenging in general, but to have a teenage girl in your house with no access to friends, to tell them that to tell her she can't go anywhere, she can't do anything. It was really hard. It was really hard on her and our whole family. But there were a lot of big losses. For example, she ran on the cross country team with her high school, and again, sort of kind of overnight, that opportunity went away. When the schools all were quarantined and went on lockdown, a lot of those type of sports, they just went away. And then when they did finally bring it back, cross country initially was a no-cut sport. So you could have as many, if you wanted to go run on the cross country team, you could. Like, everybody was welcome. And when they initially started bringing it back, they brought it back at very limited quantities. And when they did that, a lot of the kids just didn't return.
Wow.
So that was tough. Another interesting thing for my daughter, and I think for the archives, is because my daughter was 15 when COVID started, and because of her birthday, she had already finished her driver's ed class, which it's just a coincidence with timing. She had also finished what they call behind the wheel. So when kids go through driver's ed, they have to actually have a physical driving portion. So she had finished that. Again, just her birthday, and we had timing. We had just finished those things. So she was actually able to get her, she already had her permit before COVID started, which at first didn't seem like a big deal until she turned 16 and she was able to get her license, where some of the kids that didn't have driver's ed and didn't finish behind the wheel couldn't get their licenses because there was no driver's ed running.
Yeah.
And
Think about that.
Right. And then once driver's ed started back up, they couldn't do behind the wheel for safety reasons, because you're in a enclosed area with the driver's ed teacher. Again, fortunately, we had finished all of that before COVID started. And so I don't know if you want to call it a fun fact, but when she turned 16 and I took her to the DMV to get her driver's license, she did not have to take a driving test.
No way.
But the DMV still issued her a driver's license at age 16 because they were not administering any driving tests.
No way.
Yes, so that is a very interesting fact to think about, that there's a whole population of teenagers out there, at least in North Carolina. So I'm speaking for North Carolina and for Charlotte. But so when she turned 16, she did not have to take a driving test, but she did get the provisional license. And then at 16 and a half, you go back and you get they call it an after nines. So your driver's license means now your original driver's license is restricted, so you can't drive you can drive up to 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Then the after nines, she goes back at 16 and a half, and when she got that, there was still no driving test, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think at the time they still were not administering driving tests. And then when she went back that's still a provisional license. And then you go back, and I can't remember the details, but maybe when she's 17, you go back and you get the full license, which is a fully unrestricted license. And when she went and got that, or maybe that was the after nines. But anyway, the point was she never had to take a driving test, and she has a full driver's license now.
Wow.
And it's my understanding that they will not ever make her go back and do that because she already has the driver's license. So
interesting.
Yes.
A little scary too, if you think about it.
It is a little scary. And the way I've heard it explained to me is if the DMV were to go back and try to do the backlog of 2 years worth of driving tests, they don't have the capacity to do that.
And it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's just a little scary to think, but.
Yeah, and I think it's also tough because she spent her sophomore, junior, and part of her senior year virtually for high school. That's tough. There's a lot of big milestones in high school that she ended up missing because she couldn't do them in person. And I think that really changed the attitude towards school as well. You're sitting in your bedroom by yourself on the floor, looking at a Zoom video, and a lot of the kids didn't go on live camera. So I know a couple times I peeked in and she's over there doing whatever on the other computer and then just has her school computer open, right? So I think a lot of that engagement was missing because the kids weren't in person. And of course, high school is formative years for a lot of people. She did just recently go to her senior prom, and she did go to her junior prom, so she fortunately didn't have to miss out on those experiences. Yeah. But I know there were a lot of other kids who did miss their proms, and they did miss having a big formal graduation. So that was tough. I think another big thing for her, change for us, I guess, was that she was applying to colleges kind of during the height of a lot of that stuff, or I guess more towards the tail end of that. But when she was applying to colleges, a lot of the colleges had flipped over to SAT optional. So they did that because they recognized that, a lot of the students just didn't have the same access to education during those years. Again, my daughter, she was driving, she was, walking, talking, doing all those things. But this is kind of a side story, but I was talking to someone that was a speech pathologist, and they were saying that there's so many kids that during those years where they're learning to talk, people were talking behind masks, and the children were talking behind masks, and there's going to be possibly a cluster of people that are maybe slightly delayed because some of those really formative early years, everybody was behind a mask.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. And you can see that there may be some consequences, and like you said, not necessarily, it's not always negative consequences, but just consequences that arise from that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So what would you say, Caroleen, is one of the biggest ways, or just something that was very meaningful to how you were personally impacted? You talked a lot about your work, and you talked a lot about your daughter, and being a mother to a high schooler at the time.
Yeah.
As it's had its own challenges. But tell me about you. How did you feel that you were impacted over these last few years?
Yeah, so I would actually say one of the biggest impacts that I felt was my marriage ended. And I would say that a large part of that was due to COVID. So this was a second marriage for me. And at the time, he and I had been, when COVID started, he and I had been married for about 2 years. We also started that business together. But we have a fairly small home. And so I live in a townhouse. It's, 2 bedrooms, it's 2 floors, and the bottom floor is around 600 square feet. So that's pretty small. And he's my ex-husband now, but at the time we were married. And so when COVID hit, we both immediately started working from home. And he works in banking, and I'm an engineer, so I'm in engineering. At the time I was working for Microsoft. And again, I say overnight, but all of a sudden we just both had to work from home 5 days a week. Before, we both had the option of remote working, but he had an office, I had an office to go into in Charlotte, and I had an office. And so, we might go in a couple of days here and go in a couple of days there, but when all the lockdowns and quarantine started happening, we both started working from home 5 days a week. We have a very small home. We didn't have a dedicated office. So for a while, we were working kind of in this small room by the kitchen. And probably about halfway through COVID, we had 2 separate desks, and we moved our desks out into the dining room. And for about 2-3 years, we were working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, like in a very small space. He's in a management role at the bank, and I was in an engineering role at Microsoft. And so we both had very busy jobs where we were both on video calls and phone calls, the majority of the day. And I know that added a lot of stress to our lives. It added a lot of stress to our personal lives. And, we decided to end the marriage. I'm not going to say that it was definitely because of COVID, but I will say that, during COVID, it really forced us to spend a lot of time together in very close proximity, and we didn't have as many outlets to do other things and to get out. That just added a lot of stress to our personal lives. It added stress to our professional lives, but it was tough. Like I went on a lot of walks, so I'm very fortunate. I'm in Charlotte. I live in the South Park area, so I live very close to the mall, and I can go out my front door and go and walk for miles and miles and miles. And I remember very early on in COVID, I was walking. I wear an Apple Watch; it tracks my fitness, and I was walking probably around 8 miles a day. So I would walk in the morning, and then sometimes during the day I would take, more walks, and then in the evening I would just walk and walk and walk, because that was one of the few activities that I could do and be safe from a medical perspective, or, as in not catching COVID, following the quarantine rules. So I did a lot of walking, and that's how I was able to kind of get out of the house. But like I said, we had a small house. We didn't have a dedicated office because we didn't need one initially. And I know like some people moved and changed housing and stuff during COVID. We chose not to because the proximity to my daughter's high school was great. I love the location. I'm actually very happy with my home. I didn't want to change it. And I think, I still remember early in COVID, people saying, this will be like 3 months. Like one of my friends was like, 3 months, that'll be like the long end of this, right? Well, it ended up lasting closer to 3 years. Yeah. So we, it was tough on our marriage. I think for some people it strengthened their marriage. For us, it had the opposite effect. So, yeah.
And you work together, correct?
Well, we didn't. So we had what I'll call our day jobs. So I worked at Microsoft in engineering, and he, it was in banking.
Yeah.
So we worked at different companies. But then, yes, you're right. We also had a small business that we started together, and that was the business I was describing. That we started right at right at the beginning of COVID.
Okay.
Not that we knew it. It's just the timing. That's how it worked out. So yes, we were both working our day jobs side by side, and then also launching a small business at the same time. So there was just a lot of stressors on there. But I think without that forced proximity with COVID, things could have been different. But at the same time, like, one of the things that I recognized was really important during COVID was, how do you cope? Right? So for me, I coped with a lot of things by going on a lot of walks. I live 5 miles from where I was born. I am a Charlotte native, so I am very fortunate. I have a very strong network of friends, family that are local. Even though I couldn't see them so much, they were still in the area, so I could reach out to a lot of friends. And I did something interesting. So, obviously I'm a library lover. I'm on the foundation board. And so every year for my birthday, I always do a fundraiser for the library. That's just something I've been doing for years. And because I couldn't have like my regular party where everybody gets together, what I ended up doing one year was, and this was during COVID where people were still like wearing masks and social distancing, I invited everybody to hang out at Symphony Park, which is just a big open area with like an amphitheater right by South Park Mall. And I called it a BYOE party, which was bring your own everything. So I told people, I was like, bring your own food, don't share it. Bring your own drink, don't share it. Bring your own chair or blanket, and everybody kind of had their own little corners, but everybody could still be in the same place and hang out. And I had probably 30 or 40 people show up to that. And the way that it impacts the library and the foundation was, I asked, don't bring me a gift, just make a donation to the library foundation, like on behalf of my birthday. And so people did that. But I think people were really craving a way to connect. And quite a few people showed up. They brought their camping chairs, and people could still talk to each other, right? So you could still sit on your blanket and talk to the people in the chairs next to you, but still maintain that 6 feet of social distancing.
Yeah.
So.
That's so cool. I love that. It's
Yeah.
so creative.
Yeah, it was, and I was really surprised. It's probably one of the biggest turnouts I've had. And I think because people just wanted a way to connect with other people in person, but still do it safely.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of your small business that you started with your ex-husband, you guys are still running that?
No, so we actually ended up closing that business.
Okay.
And so interestingly, this month, I just ramped up my coaching business again, but on my own.
Yeah.
So I just opened another LLC, and it's, under my name alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best of luck on that.
Thank you.
It's very exciting.
Yes.
So I guess a question I also had was, you talk about being a Charlotte native, and you talk about having this really great sense of community here, and just having a lot of relationships.
Yeah.
How were those relationships impacted these last few years, especially with the social distancing and isolation?
Yeah, I think friendships and relationships are always hard in the sense of, they take work, right? And they take effort. And I think during COVID, it took more work, and it took more effort because, I have a lot of friends that I see by, I don't know what's the right word, but proximity, right? So I have a lot of friends that I met at the coffee shop, and I would see them because I would go to the coffee shop, and I would see them over and over and over, and we would just naturally see each other. Same thing with the gym. So I'm a big YMCA person, and I would go to the gym 5 days a week. And so I had like my network of friends that I saw on a regular basis. And all of that, like those little casual run-ins on a regular basis, they all went away. And so I had to be a lot more intentional about maintaining friendships, about maintaining relationships. And I think, I mean, there was definitely a period where people were just like video burnout, where everything was, oh, let's connect on video, and everybody, let's talk on video. And at first it was kind of cool, and then it became, okay, so I've got to be on video like 7 or 8 hours for my work day, and the last thing I want to do is get back on the video for like another hour or two, even if that means connecting with my friends. So I think it did make it harder to maintain relationships, but it was doable. You just had to be intentional. Like the example I gave with having the party outside, that was a way to still maintain friendships in a fun way, but not be on video. At one point, I had a girlfriend who she wasn't feeling well. We weren't sure what was going on, if she had COVID or not. And so I went to her house. We sat in her garage. We left the garage door open. She sat in one camping chair. I sat in the other one. We both wore masks, but we're sitting in the garage, together. And you kind of we had to get creative on ways to still hang out with each other. One of my big hobbies is playing tennis, and tennis is actually, I think it was deemed to be a pretty safe activity during COVID, because you were outside most of the time. Right? So you were outside, and although you were like sharing the same tennis balls, that there wasn't a lot of close activity. And it was interesting because I remember when we first started doing this, I think everybody was bringing their own balls to serve with, tennis balls to serve with. So that was kind of odd. And then eventually, I think the studies came out and said, well, you can't really transmit COVID playing tennis. And so whenever we would change sides, we would walk like in different places so that nobody was crossing each other. So it was interesting watching that evolution. But I did appreciate that I could still play tennis, which allowed me to maintain a lot of those connections in real life.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I guess I'm just going to follow up with one last question for you. Do you have a story or an experience or anything else that you would like to share with us before we finish?
I think it's very interesting. I don't work in the medical field, right? So I don't know a lot about COVID. But throughout this whole time, I never tested positive for COVID. And there were many opportunities where I had interacted with people. My daughter actually had tested positive several times. We were in the same household, never got it. My husband at the time had tested positive for COVID a couple of times. We did not, separate. We didn't go in any kind of like special like mask procedures or anything. And I remember a lot of my friends were asking me like, oh, well, he tested positive for COVID. Are you going to, separate? Because they know our home is so small. Yeah. And I said, no, I'm not going to. Now, we did separate from everybody else. Like we did not go out. We didn't do anything like that. But in our own home, like we did not maintain any extra social distancing. And I never tested positive for COVID. So it makes me wonder, did that mean that I never got COVID? Or does that mean that maybe I was one of those people that wasn't prone to COVID? Or does that mean that, and I tested a lot. Like I took a lot of the COVID test. I did the rapid test. I went to the doctor. I did the PCR test, the more extensive testing. I mean, I did a lot of tests, and I never tested positive for COVID. So it makes me wonder, like, did I somehow either get it and never test myself when I had it? Or did I not ever really get it? Is there something about me that kept me from getting it? Because like I said, my daughter had it, my husband at the time had it. I know there were times where I had interacted with people and crossed paths with people, maybe not in super close proximity. I was pretty conscientious about that. But why was it that I never got it? That's something that I think about a lot. And again, I was careful. I had the hand sanitizer, and I wore the mask like I was supposed to, and I maintained the social distance like I was supposed to, except for when people in my own home had it, and even then I didn't get it. So I thought that was interesting. My mother and stepfather and grandmother, they also live in the Charlotte area. Oh, so my grandmother's passed away now, but the three of them, they also never got COVID.
Interesting.
My grandmother, was in hospice care for the last year and a half, and she just passed away a couple of months ago. But obviously she was 90 when she passed away. And she was living with my mother, and so my mother was very strict about the COVID protocols. At some point, my grandmother had the hospice workers coming in to help with her care, and my mother wouldn't let workers in that couldn't prove they were vaccinated, and that was the choice that my mother made. But she and my stepdad and my grandmother, they never got COVID either. So it just makes me wonder, obviously I'm the child of my mom. Now my daughter, she did get it several times, but everybody's got different genetics. Yeah. But me, my mom, and my grandma never got COVID.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Right. Yeah. And I know for them, they were again, my mom and stepdad and grandma, they were extremely strict. Yeah. So they were. They really, really adhered to all the lockdown and the quarantine, and pretty much the only outside visitors they had were hospice healthcare workers, and they were all medical professionals. And so I do feel like those individuals especially were very tight on the protocol. Mm-hmm. But the four of us, we never got it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Caroleen. Thank
Yes.
you for sharing your story with us and for just being so open and willing with us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I enjoyed it.